Ready? Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the third and final CRE Summit Zoom. We're delighted to bring these to you. We're hopeful that they've been helpful for you in your practice as we go through these difficult times. I would like to make a statement from the heart on behalf of the Summit Board of Directors. In light of the dramatic events of the past week, and if you haven't heard yet, just less than an hour ago, we received a call from Matt Dwyer, and he was in the Blackstone district, and they had another shooting down there. I think there might be an injury, but no death. And both he and Greg Cutchall are looking after their business interests right now and won't be able to make it. But we all have a heavy heart as the organizers of this. And I want to say that although the country is testing the fabric of our democracy, one of our principles and our goals for the CRE Summit and our commercial real estate community who function so well together is to continue our work to make a more successful community and recognize, and we do recognize, that racial bias has absolutely no role in our profession. So with that somber note, we'll now go into our session. So we all know the lease. The lease is our heart and soul. Our business does not function without the lease. And whether you're the tenant looking at what your rights and obligations are in the lease, or the landlord who cares about the rent and the consistency of the rent payments and the collateral for that rent, and making sure that the tenant follows the rules and regulations, and then carrying over to the lender who's going to look at the package of leases or the lease on a sole property and determine whether or not the lease supports a certain amount of loan. I call the lease the heart and soul of commercial real estate. So the developer gets a piece of land under contract, is really excited about it, goes out and gets it engineered, rezoned, and then starts the work of building it with the architects and leasing the property so that it can be a successful venture. On the receiving side, that developer landlord is out seeking through the brokerage community the tenants for this particular property. And it can be apartments, office, retail, industrial, whatever. But it's the same process, as we all know, over and over. And once those two pieces are put together, or at some point in that equation, the developer is going to go to a lender and seek a loan of somewhere between 65 and 75% of construction costs and show a pro forma that would support that sort of loan going down the road. So what we're talking about today, and why I particularly felt this was an important subject now, is about today and how we work with our leases and our lenders so that our livelihoods can survive and prosper until we resume a normal market. And that's the goal of today's work. So let me set the rules of what would be a mediation. None of these are formal mediations, but I do want to point out to you the certain ingredients of mediation that are taking place every day between tenant and landlord and lender. And it's those three parties working together, hopefully seamlessly, that are going to help us work through these difficult times. The tenant calls the landlord and says they'd like to do a lease, and they negotiate the terms of that lease, and of course put it in writing. And now you've got a written document, a set of rules to go by during the lease period. As I said earlier, a landlord, once they accumulate enough leases to satisfy a condition, a leasing condition in the proposed loan, they go to the lender and show the package of leases. and discuss what's in the leases and how strong the tenants are there guarantees, etc. The issue now is if a tenant becomes distressed, then what do we do? They can't meet the terms of the lease the way they were written, and they're concerned. They're concerned about their business, particularly in this virus period now. And now what do they do? And it's these kinds of conversations where tenant reaches out to landlord or landlord reaches out to lender that are critical to obtaining satisfactory amendments to the lease or to the loan terms to allow all of the parties to survive until we get more normal conditions. So the important part here and the steps of a real mediation is to talk about have the first leg of this, and we're going to do a couple of role plays in a minute of the tenant reaching out to the landlord. And statement of the problem is the tenant saying, hey, I've been shut down, or I'm only open 50%, or I can only do carry-out business, or I lost 50% of my service business. Those are all facts that we're going to cover in a few minutes. And I'm going to pepper them with a few questions. And then we're going to have the landlord turn to the lender and talk about how we restructure the loan in light of the fact that the tenants aren't able to meet their lease terms. The most important ingredient for all of us, and you don't need to have a formal mediator, you don't need to have a mediation, but you do need to have a healthy negotiation, an open communication conversation between all three parties at some point in time to resolve these issues. And the number one issue on this slide is problem identification and common interest. It seems to me that in this period of time, keeping our tenants alive, keeping our landlord shopping center or office building alive, and keeping the lender without having them to have to foreclose on property and get into the situation we got into back in the 2008, 2012, and I could go back a few more recessions before that. So we're talking about these parties working together in conjunction to recognize the common interest, the fact that we're all in this together and we should all be looking out for the other person's interests as well as your own. And that's really what this today is all about. Just a quick lesson on how we can use graciousness and kindness and open communication to reach results that will be satisfactory for all of us. And so that we get to the end of this year and hopefully with the virus moving on, with us having a vaccine, we may have this period of time where we all look back to 2020 and say, wow, I'm certainly glad that's over with. Now, I'm going to give you a quick example of what a good negotiation is and what a bad one is. Slide. So, it's called bargaining. Certain two ways to bargain. There's only two. One's positional, where party A says, I can't pay the rent. And landlord says, I need you to pay the rent because I can't make my mortgage payment unless you do. That is what we call classic positional bargaining. Okay? That is not listening to the interests of the parties, although I recognize that the three names we have on here, particularly Starbucks and Chipotle, are like dealing with some commercial real estate owner in this market said, like dealing with Godzilla. Some of these folks you just can't bargain with. On the other hand, let's take a look at what took place recently. Slide, please. How to bargain with interests in mind. So on their own, corporate landlords across the country are starting to recognize that this whole office model is changing and will change even more perhaps with folks staying at home, downsizing, et cetera. And already, here's an article in National Real Estate Investor stating that the landlords, the office landlords in particular, are already recognized that that's an interest of their tenants that's going to need to be dealt with in changing the way they lease, downsizing these, maybe reducing rents, all those things to keep the whole system working. So we have positional bargaining, no good. We have bargaining and looking at interest, real good.
Yeah.
That's where we're headed today. So with that, I'd like to introduce our team of mediators. On my right is Lindsay Banks with the Lerner Company, Nancy Johnson with NK Johnson Company, Sam Wasser, President of Access Bank. So we're going to role play for the next period of time and see if we can get across some principles that will be good examples for you. Next slide, please. Our first scenario has Lindsay serving as tenant, Nancy as the landlord, and Sam as lender. The facts are that this is a single tenant, 10,000 square foot building, and 100% of the space is occupied by Lindsay or her client. Tenant is a service business whose business is down 50% over the last 90 days. And tenant has reached out to Nancy as landlord and wants a rent reduction. They simply cannot pay the rent they were paying. And on the other hand, the landlord is concerned that the rent reduction will preclude them from being able to make their debt service payments. So after the meeting between tenant and landlord turns around and calls or meets with lender to discuss the situation. And fortunately, landlord and this bank have a long-term relationship and have a nice discussion. One of the additional facts is the mortgage has a 65% loan to value. The tenant previously had a pretty good balance sheet, but here we are today. Lindsay, what's your first approach to your landlord?
Generally, I'm going to play the part of the tenant's broker for this and call and say, Nancy, first of all, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Haven't spoken in a while, but I'm sure you know all the chaos that's going on, and we've been trying to make through, my client has been trying to make it through this COVID craziness as best as they can. They applied and received the PPP loan and were able to get through a little bit of this using those funds and keep their employees. However, unfortunately, their business is down so much. And while we hope that it's going to rebound much quicker, and we had initially thought it would just be kind of a short blip in the radar that the PPP loan would get us through, it's looking like this is going to take us a little bit longer than we had really anticipated. And in order not to have to downsize or furlough any employees, we're hoping that the landlord will be able to help us with some rent relief, because that's one of our largest expenses at this point.
So tell me a little bit about what the tenant business is and how they're doing now versus prior to COVID.
So a tenant has a printing business. She supplies for a lot of offices and things. She's got corporate clients, and business is down 50% from where it was last year. She'd been historically doing very well. She'd seen 15% increases year over year in the last 3 years. And she really was feeling good about where her business was headed in the future. But this has really taken the wind out of her sails, and now she's doing 50% of where she was.
Sure. And so we're 5 years into a 10-year lease. They've been a very good tenant, which, we greatly appreciate as a landlord. They've always had good correspondence with us, which again, we like to see that.
Yep.
So they're looking for a rent reduction for 50% rent for the next 6 months.
Yeah, anything really that you could help provide for us would be really beneficial. I'll certainly say, if she can get at least 50% rent for 6 months, that would be helpful.
Okay. And so they did receive the PPP, but that obviously is up. Can they provide proof of that to us?
I could certainly ask the accountant.
Okay.
If they can provide some proof of where those funds have gone. But as my understanding is that they've been depleted.
Okay. Again, the landlord, good tenant, occupies the whole building. We don't want to lose them. We want to work with them.
Mm-hmm.
So I will talk to the lender, which is Access Bank, and go from there.
Okay. I appreciate it. Let me know.
Let me ask a question before, Nancy, you go talk to the bank. Lindsay, your client, I noticed on the lease, there is no personal guarantee. I think that both the landlord and the bank thought that their balance sheet, the company's balance sheet, was strong enough at the time they entered into it to do the deal without a personal guarantee. Now, with even though it's not your client's fault with the virus, would your client be willing to sign a personal guarantee in order to get this extension?
Are you asking for them to put a personal guarantee on the remaining term of the lease, or for all of it?
Yes.
I think that at this point, I think she feels really good about where her business is going to go in the future. And when everything comes back to normal, I think she'd be willing to do that. But of course, I'd have to run it past her. But my indication would be that she feels good about everything and likes where she is and doesn't have any intention of closing. So.
And I understand she's been in business a number of years. Does she have any plans, or does she have somebody taking over her business? Or tell us a little bit about the operations and who's doing what.
Well, she's really the sole proprietor. She owns and operates. This is her daily business. She has no intention of retiring anytime in the near future. She has talked to a couple other companies about maybe purchasing them and moving them into her operation because she's got 10,000 square feet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think she's got good potential for the long run for you. And maybe if some of those acquisitions work out, then she'd be able to bring on some great staff as a kind of the next step for her.
And potentially get a longer term lease for the lender as a result, I would hope.
Yeah, possibly. Absolutely. Okay. Of course, we have to wait and see how all of this COVID works out, because right now she's really just worried about making those rent payments and making sure she can keep her employees as she has them today.
Well, does she have a plan during the virus or coming out of it for growing back the sales that she's lost?
Well, most of her clients are, I should say a lot of them are corporate clients that she feels are going to return to her as their businesses pick back up. And we're starting to see some signs of that. And then in addition, there may be some closures, unfortunately, but she does feel very positive about what the future will be as we rebound from COVID.
Great.
Would you say most of her customers are office users versus maybe retailers?
Yeah, I would say probably it's about a 75-25 split. 75% are office users, which is why it's been really badly hit with what she's been doing historically.
People aren't in their offices. They're not printing from the printer. They're not making copies and all of that. Exactly. The encouraging thing is we keep hearing that the office is going to rebound. People are going to go back to work. I had a particular client tell me yesterday that colleague tell me that they have more employees that want to come back than they can actually physically put in the space right now due to the COVID requirements. So that's encouraging that most of her customers are office versus retailer service.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And with the annual increases she's had over the last 3 years, and she really keeps her eye on the ball, I think she can rebound. So we want to help with them.
And she's been looking at some of those companies I talked about her with acquisition in the future, a little bit more under the tech sector and how she can best integrate those, her printing company with technology and being a full service office provider. So I think we're going to see good things from her in the future.
It's very progressive, which
Yep.
you know, change with the changes or you won't be around.
That's right.
Okay.
Before we shift to Nancy, the landlord, seeing Sam, the lender, I'm going to pretend I'm going to have a cup of coffee with Nancy, and she, as mediator, I'm going to call it a caucus where we get to go one-on-one and talk about some private things. But Nancy, tell me, you and your client as landlord, if there's a shortfall and the bank won't cover it all, is your client, the landlord, in a position cash-wise to fund 6 months or a year of the deficiency in payments?
I believe because of some other properties that we own or the landlord owns that are cash flowing and haven't had a result of haven't been negatively affected by COVID, that we could step up and pay those payments. If need be, we'd certainly like to get some relief from the landlord if possible, or the lender if possible, but that's certainly an option, and especially because we're not highly leveraged on the property at this time, which helps.
And it looks like there's 65% of loan, and the fair market value was from a fairly recent appraisal, I understand.
Correct.
Okay, and lastly, when you talk to the bank, I noticed in your loan documents that your client has not personally guaranteed the loan because the tenant was strong enough to support this loan. If the bank were to ask for a personal guarantee, what would your client's position be on that?
I think they would look at it for a short period of time, maybe guarantee it for a couple years till this tenant gets through it. I mean, obviously people prefer not to sign them if they don't have to, but I think they would certainly look at it again due to the success of their other properties that they own.
Right.
Hi, Sam.
Hi, how are you?
So you're getting calls like this every day?
We are getting some calls. We do have quite a bit of commercial real estate investor properties, along with owner occupied, and businesses in general have been definitely affected by this COVID situation. So yes, we have gotten quite a few calls, and especially on PPP. So yeah.
Right. So I own a building. We have a great tenant in it. They're 5 years into a 10-year lease. Their business has been affected because of COVID, and they're asking for some rent relief. Wondering if you could give an interest-only loan for us for 6 months while we give them some rent reduction to keep them going. Their business has been up 15% for the last 3 years, each year consecutively. So we don't feel that we're going to lose them, and we want to work with them, and we want to know what if the lender be willing to do that for us on an interest-only for 6 months.
You know, we are fortunate that the examiners have given us some latitude to make some concessions during these difficult times. And so we are able to provide some flexibility. Can you just tell me more about how's your portfolio doing overall? And are you going to need requests on any of your other properties, or is this particular property? Can you kind of tell me more about the global picture?
Fortunately, the other properties have not been affected by COVID, and they are cash flowing, and some are paid for. So we're not really in a panic situation right now with this tenant, but because they do occupy 100% of the building, by giving a large reduction in rent, you know, that does affect the cash flow of the building. If need be, we could potentially talk about using some collateral from one of the other buildings to help with this. But if we could get some interest only to help them, that would be our first choice. But if we had to look to collateralize and get, you know, however you would, what would you propose as far as one of our other buildings right now that is paid for and cash flowing? How would you want to pull out some cash out of that? Or,
you know, that certainly is something that we would look at. Can you tell me more about the tenant though? When you think they're going to recover? When do you feel like, when they do come back, they will be able to make full rent?
Now that people are starting to phase their workers back into their offices, I think the tennis business is going to slowly increase. I think it'll probably take a good 4 to 6 months to get back to, somewhat normal levels. But it is an owner occupied, or the owner is very dialed in the business. She's there every day. She's running it. She has a lot of experience. She's trying to look at acquiring some other businesses. And so I feel comfortable that they're progressive enough for the future that they will continue to do well, and hopefully even sign a longer term lease in the building once we get through this mess.
Now, if we look at doing interest only, are you thinking that we would defer the principal payments towards the end and have a larger balloon, or would you want to increase the amortization once that 6-month interest only period was up?
I think we'd look at either option, probably more so the increase the balloon, just because we could get through it. And then as their business recovers, then we have some more cash flow to apply towards the balloon payment.
So let me interrupt for 1 minute and have everyone sort of get in a helicopter with me at 10,000 feet, let's say, and let's look down on what just went on here. This is the purest example I could think of, where 3 parties are taking into account the interest of each other. So the tenant, Lindsay, has shared the problems they're having, and her interest is to continue her business, but because the revenue's down, they have to drop their expenses for a while. The landlord is concerned that they cannot service the debt and has now shared that with the bank. And the bank is saying, we're willing to work with you to help you get through this, but we want to know on the other side that we're going to get paid back at some time. And there's going to be some device negotiated as part of an agreement, which would be a modification of the loan here and a lease amendment over here, because you want these agreements in writing. Suggestion, huge one, get them in writing, please. And
use a good law firm.
and use this as a great example of how people can work together, as opposed to Nancy coming in and saying, I need interest only, and if I don't get interest only, Sam, we're moving the loan, something. Lindsay comes to Nancy and says, hey, I just can't pay the rent. I'm throwing in the towel. If you don't drop the rent by 50%, I'm leaving. So that's positional. We're talking about interest, and now you can see a good example. Okay?
Correct. Yeah, and I would say, I shared some statistics with these guys this morning that I got, that the CMBS market, there's defaults and
Tell them what that, just to make sure.
Well, I think the stat was 35% on hotel, was it 23% on restaurant and 5% on offices?
This is commercial
rates.
Mortgage-backed security loans.
Yes, so secondary market we'd call it, or whereas we are not seeing that at our level, because we are sitting down with our clients and trying to figure out a way to get through this difficult period. Obviously, there has to be a long-term solution for all of us, but we feel it's in the best interest, like Jerry said, to work with our clients to help them through this difficult time for the long term. So,
and if I may, what you said earlier, Sam, there's even a 4th party here at the table that's not at the table, and that's the regulators.
Yep,
saying,
absolutely.
encouraging the banks to make deals that aren't going to be deemed, what do you call it, classified loans. Okay, so this is a great example.
Are you saying, Sam, the regulators are getting a little longer leashes than they have in the past?
Yeah, they are. They're being encouraging. They're so before in the past, if lenders made concessions on loans, we would have to classify some of those as troubled. It's called TDRs, troubled debt restructures. And they are giving us some reprieve on that, so we don't have to, like Jerry said, classify or have those loans listed on our classified report watch credit report. So it is. They have been more lenient, I would say, in this time, and they're actually encouraging us to work with our borrowers, because this is a nationwide, worldwide problem. It's not local by any means.
So one of our questions is that reduction in rent typically a deferral or a forgiveness?
And if you couldn't hear that, is that reduction in rent typically a deferral
Or a forgiveness?
or forgiveness? Okay.
I would say I could speak only for what I've been working on, and I would say 90% of the time that is a deferment. So tenants are coming, they're a lot of times asking for a forgiveness or a full abatement of rent, whether it be 100% or 50%. And what the middle ground that most landlords are working with is that we'll allow some amount of deferment, whether that's 50 of 100, and then it's going to be paid back within a certain timeline, depending on the length of their lease term and depending on tenant's history. What I've seen historically is about a 1-year repayment, depending on how long they needed the rent deferment for. So if it was 4 months or 6 months.
And by the way, if you have questions, please submit them and we'll try to pick them off between now and the end of the hour. Any other questions, Madison?
Not right now.
Okay, we're going to move to scenario 2. So scenario 2 is a multi-tenant shopping center. Lindsay's going to be the tenant again, Nancy landlord, and Sam lender. So the tenant, Lindsay and her client, have 20% of the center. This store has been closed due to COVID-19 and has not paid rent since March. The tenant has no idea when the business can reopen or what the terms of the reopening will be. Landlord has spoken to tenant and knows that without all of the shopping center's rents, he will not be able to service the mortgage payment. And landlord then calls the lender to discuss the situation. Let's start with the conversation between tenant and landlord.
Well, Nancy, I hate that we're having to have this conversation yet again with another tenant, but everybody's hurting right now. So my client, I helped put them into the center a couple of years ago. You remember they relocated. So they've been wine bar operator for many years, great business historically. However, they're not a food operator. They're only serving alcohol and wine mostly. And they have had to close completely because they're a bar. And now they're able to reopen, but unfortunately it's at 50% capacity. And they just, quite frankly, don't know if the clients are there to have it make sense for them to be open at all. So they're not really sure when it's going to make sense for them to reopen and bring their employees back. So I know that they haven't been current on their rent, and we just need to figure out a solution for them so that they can get open and operating again.
So they do want to stay open. They don't want to close permanently.
No, they don't want to close permanently. They definitely want to reopen. They are not planning on opening today or tomorrow.
Sure.
They're waiting to see how the customers respond and how they're visiting bars and things. But they would like to reopen in the long run, yes.
And I understand they have a very loyal clientele that they've had for years, which is very helpful.
Yep.
Are they having problems getting product, do you know, from the distributor?
A lot of the country they are much lower on product. It's not, it hasn't come to a screeching halt. Well, it did at the beginning, but now it's kind of reopened a little bit. They're able to get some of the product that they would like in, but not able to service quite as much as they would like to be.
Sure. And their clientele is a little higher end,
Mm-hmm.
and which I assume is helpful in that they're not maybe being as affected by COVID as much.
Yeah, they're trying to figure out how it's going to go about for them to do the deliveries, or if people can do pickup orders. They've done some pickup orders, but it's been very few and far between most of what they've seen. They've got a loyal clientele that they think is going to come back. It's a very social environment.
Right.
People go there and are drinking wine by the glass as opposed to buying bottles and providing for their home.
Sure. I do understand alcohol consumption is up, so that may help them.
I think
that may help them in the future. And if they do have a clientele that's been loyal, that would help as well.
Yes.
So what type of relief are they looking for?
Well, I think right now they're hopeful to have a complete abatement of their rent, but you and I both know, that may not be possible. So I'd like to be able to take back to them, whatever is the best you can do really for the
Sure,
time being.
sure.
And then we'll just try to make it work. They've done the PPP loan, but it's gone through, they've gone through that. Just what's possible for them.
Okay, all right. And again, we appreciate that the tenant is being, transparent and talking to us via their broker. We don't like it when the tenants just go silent, because then we worry that they're just not dealing with the issue, which they're going to have to.
Right.
So would they be able to do some kind of percentage rent initially when they did reopen, and any idea when that might be?
Well, I think that their goal is to test the waters in late June, and then maybe be open in July.
Okay.
They can only be at 50% capacity at this point, but
Okay.
I think that they might be open to some kind of percentage rent, or maybe it's a base rent with a little bit of percentage rent on top of it.
Okay.
Something along those lines, something to minimize their exposure for the short term.
Okay.
But yeah, they'd be open to one of those scenarios for sure.
Okay. All right.
I'm going to caucus with Lindsay and her client and find out, Lindsay, if you feel that your client is taking the steps necessary to lower expenses, such as lowering their labor. Maybe they're spending quite a bit on marketing or whatever. But what steps are they taking to ensure that they have some success, even if the landlord were to give this small base with a percentage rent going forward?
So the first part, they have tried to lower expenses. However, they don't want to fire any employees or furlough employees or put them on unemployment, because their concern is that they won't be able to rehire them back upon reopening. And especially given the hospitality industry and being able to find good employees, these have been longtime employees for them, and they want to keep them on and make sure they're able to be there when it's time to reopen again. They have been marketing using some lower cost marketing efforts. It's not really their demographic, but they have been doing a lot of social media because it's a little bit less expensive. And that's where they've been trying to market their pick up orders and things like that. So you can place your order ahead of time and then they'll bring it right out to your car. So they've been lowering and not doing the traditional publications and magazine ads and things like that they have done historically.
Does the family or the principal and the bar business have some net worth that they could put up an additional deposit on the lease to secure their performance?
She's got a little bit of liquid cash that I think she could put an additional deposit. I can't say that there's a strong net worth behind it. They've been bar owners and operators, and this is their only location. So I'd say they're strong for a local, and I think that they'd be open to maybe putting a little bit of an additional deposit on it if they could.
And I understand they work it themselves, right?
Yes,
So they have a relationship with the customers.
Yep, they're there every day.
Okay. So now I'd like to caucus with your landlord, because Mr. Landlord, I understand that this bar just kills it when they're open and has been a real positive force for the shopping center. And I'm presuming you don't want to have them go out of business.
No, they're a good tenant mix with the other tenants, and we certainly want to work with them. It has been a struggle that they have not been able to be open at all, or very little due to the pickup and delivery. So we absolutely want to work with them, and it's a tenant that we don't want to lose, because they've been a good long-term tenant. They're there every day. Their eye is on the ball. They don't want to lose their employees, which says a lot to their character, and trying to keep the good employees. So yeah, we want to work with them, definitely.
And are there other tenants, presumably that are struggling, that is making it difficult for you and your client to keep this thing going?
Fortunately, we have two anchors, one being pharmacy and one being a grocery store component. And those two sectors have not, they're actually thriving in this environment. We do have a few other tenants in this center that are struggling, But I would say thanks to the grocery store component and the pharmacy, it's certainly helping the center stay alive.
So it's my understanding now you're going to visit with your lender
Yes,
about being able to accommodate Lindsay or maybe one or two other tenants.
correct.
Okay. Is that conversation about to take place?
Yes. Hey, Sam, Nancy again.
Hi, Nancy.
Remember that shopping center I bought a couple years ago?
I do.
Well, as you know, it has a very nice high-end wine bar that's been there. It's been very successful. We've had no trouble with them. They pay rent like clockwork. They're good operators, but unfortunately, due to COVID, they've been shut down almost 100%. And we want to try and give them some relief. Fortunately, because of our grocery store component and our pharmacy component, we are getting rent, so we are not upside down per se, but we may need a little relief to help. I would say probably the center's got maybe 10 tenants, and we've got 3 or 4 that are struggling. The others are strong. What would you suggest we could do for this particular tenant or the loan on the property, I guess?
Well, have you kind of taken a picture with the ones that are struggling and may not be able, maybe they've made their rent payments the last couple of months because of the PPP, but have you looked at the future and what the pro forma would look like with the struggling tenants and the strong ones kind of combined, and how much your cash flows decreased and how much relief you're going to need over the next
It's a good question.
time period?
We're fortunately, we have some percentage rent coming in on those stronger tenants. They have a break even in their leases, and they're actually, due to all the thousands of dollars we're spending a week on groceries and pharmaceutical products, their businesses are up. So we are getting a little more rent from them. We're hoping that will continue, but I would think it would level off at some point when people feel more comfortable to go back out and go in these stores versus calling Amazon for everything. I would say that of the 4 that are struggling, we may lose 2 of them. If the other strong tenants continue to thrive, we're probably even, but we're just trying to get ahead of it in case we lose all 4 of them. And then the concern is, if we do lose the 4, what is the time period to backfill those spaces? Because I don't see a lot of tenants stepping up right now to start retail businesses. They're scared. They just don't know what to do. We have a tenant in one of our centers that's a bakery, and they told me a couple weeks ago that they literally can't get sugar from Cisco, that Cisco is out of sugar, and eggs are up 65%. True story. So the concern is, how long will it take to backfill those spaces if we lose them? And so we're just trying to figure out something that we could do to lessen that blow in the event that happens.
So, right now your loan's like on a 10-year amortization. And so there may be some room to extend that if you feel like your big, strong tenants are strong enough and can cash flow maybe a longer term amortization.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's something you've thought
I think
about.
that would certainly be helpful, yes.
Or are you looking for more immediate relief with like interest only? I guess I just want to kind of understand your specific needs. And
I think due to the strength of the 2 large anchors, I think if we could do a restructure, that would be probably help us enough to help the smaller tenants.
And do you think that you'll be able to get enough lease extensions through these modifications if the businesses were to survive? Like you mentioned, the wine bars, you feel like they have a good future potential. Do you think you'll get a lease extension from them, or are you going to add it to the back end of the lease, or how did you think you would restructure that?
We would probably propose that we give them, with the rent reduction, we let them pay that over the next 6 to 12 months starting in January. And then ask them, in this particular case, we would ask them maybe for a longer term lease as a result. But we would try and help them throughout the rest of this year. And then as I know, the lenders like longer term leases. So if we can get some of them back on their feet and extend the leases and have them make payments over the next 12 months, then that I think keeps everybody happy, gives them the relief now, and gives you a little more comfort that they're going to be there for a longer period.
Yeah. Well, if you can get us an updated rent roll with your
Okay.
projections on what you feel like you need to provide to each of the tenants, then that's something we can definitely take into consideration and take to our team for consideration. But obviously we want to help you, but if we can look at all the numbers, and actually if we can also look at your global picture and how your other properties you feel like are going to perform, we'd love to look at that information and get back to you.
Okay, sounds good.
Great. Good job. Okay, we have one last one. We're just going to take a few minutes to do this and then we'll conclude so everybody can start thinking about doing their texts and emails, although I'm sure you've been doing them while we've been going on. Scenario 3, restaurant in shopping center. Tenant again, Lindsay, and landlord, we had Matt down, but let me service landlord, okay?
Uh-oh.
I'm going to take off landlord and then we have Sam. I'm such a tough guy. Anyway, tenant, a full service local bistro and leases 20% of the shopping center. Tenant was mandated to close in March. April, able to reopen April 1 for takeout only. April sales were down 25%. May were 50% of norm, and tenant needs 85% of pre-COVID sales in order to pay full rent and employees. Tenant is deferring only personal salary to herself. Tenant requesting full base rent abatement for April, May, June, and July. Tenant has a good relationship with the landlord, has always paid rent on time, and is 4 years into a 7-year lease. Ms. Tenant, take it away.
Hi, Jerry.
Hello, Lindsay.
I know I haven't called you like I should have.
Yeah, I heard you were in trouble and I wanted to hear it from you.
Yeah, it just got crazy with COVID and we were closing, and then we kind of tried the takeout business, and it's just been such mass chaos that I didn't reach out when I should have. But I'm always going to come through and I'm going to make it right at the end of the day. But right now, our sales are so down. We're doing great on the takeout business, much better than I ever anticipated it to be. And we've had great local support. However, we're just not there to where we need to be able to pay the rent. So I'm hoping that maybe we can structure something that once we get open and operating, we can get back to business and pay some of that back if necessary. But I'd really like to get some rent relief and get it on paper.
I have another prospective user for your space if you wanted to get out of it. Is that something you would consider at this time?
I don't think so. I think our business is going to come back. I'd really like to stay and figure it out. My intention and my goal would be to come back and stay in business and open again.
And during this period of time, you and your husband met with me, 4 years ago, and we signed that lease. But I didn't ask you for a personal guarantee. Is that something that you would be willing, both of you would be willing to do today, so that any rent we defer could be guaranteed by this?
Yes, I believe that we would be willing to sign a personal guarantee at this
What were your
point.
sales like just before the virus? Where were you year to year?
Year to year, we're down. They've been heading up. It's been a slow increase, maybe a 10% increase year over year in sales. But social media has really latched on recently with the, delivering local and supporting local restaurants. And so we hope that maybe the word has gotten out and it's going to be even better than what it was when we get back to full strength.
Okay. And like we've discussed before, you guys have been good tenants. I'm a little disappointed you didn't reach out to me, which you've admitted. But if we could make this deal, is this something, and I need to talk to my bank, is this something that you would be in a position to sign up an extension, not an extension, but a modified lease to get you through this difficult period?
Yeah, we would. Yep.
Okay.
We sure would appreciate it too.
Okay. Madam Banker,
Yes, Jerry.
Call me Mr. Landlord.
Okay, Mr. Landlord.
I've got a shopping center here, and I've got several tenants hurting, particularly the restaurant, the bistro, which you know so well. I'm going to need 2 years. I'm going to have some sort of 2-year reduction in debt service, and I think I sent you a cash flow statement. And I'd like to see if the bank would agree to lowering my payments for 2 years, whether it's interest or principal, re-amortize, and add it back on to re-amortize it after the 2-year period. I don't see, and I think you've seen the numbers, how I can make this center work without that.
You know, Mr. Landlord, the 2 years is a little long for us for making modifications. Of course, we can look at the whole picture. Do you have any additional collateral that you could maybe pledge if you need the full 2 years? You know, I think we can help you in the shorter term with a modification for maybe something shorter, but I think if we're looking at 2 years, we may need to look at something a little different.
Okay.
Have you thought of any outside collateral, another property that may be performing stronger that we could have for a 2 year for that guarantee portion?
Where we would use that other property as collateral to support this
Correct.
2-year extension. I can look at that. Maybe we could approach it by giving us a 6-month, give us 6 months, and if everything's gone well, but we can show you that the performance still isn't quite there, we maybe get another 6 months or something like that, so that you guys could take a look at it every 6 months.
I think we could look at the 6 months. I think we just have to make sure that when we're looking at the initial 6 months, that there is a longer term game plan so that we can show not only our own executive management team, but our shareholders and our examiners that there's a long-term plan and this isn't a short-term solution that isn't going to work long-term. So as long as we can show that there is a long-term plan in place, I absolutely think we can consider that.
And I'm happy to put that together, and if it's okay, I'll call you in a week or two and make an appointment and come down.
I'd love to see you, Mr.
Okay,
Landlord.
thank you. Okay, thank you for attending. Don't go away. We've got a couple of, we got a big announcement. This CRE Summit for 2020 will be held August 14th at CHI Health Center. We're delighted to do that. We've held back and held back and held back until CHI could get clearance from the state and federal authorities, but they now have clearance to have at least a 500-person event with spacing that meets all requirements, and we're delighted in that. And Planet Omaha has helped us find a virtual company. There are 2 or 3 really solid ones in the country that can do a virtual conference like this. So what we're doing, we've purchased the virtual package. We already are committed, as you know, unless we couldn't do it at all at CHI. So for those of you that want to come in August, 2.5 more months down the road, we think there'll be tremendous more improvement if we've had this much improvement in 2.5 months. Another 2.5 months, we're hopeful, let's everybody knock on wood that it gets better and better. If you want to come downtown and network and hear the live presentations, we're delighted to have you. We're working on getting Bud Crawford back, and I think we will. We do have Ryan Severino, the keynote speaker, all set to come. And we are going to blend in, we're going to change it up a little bit by blending in some topics about what's going on today, both with mainly with virus recovery and how our businesses can get back on track. We have a really great program set up. Also, I might update you on multifamily. We didn't touch on that today, but that's the best news that I know of in the business. Multifamily for the last 3 months has collected about 94% of its rents and seems to be going well. Like everybody here, people are concerned that maybe the PPP and the other government benefits void April and May rents, and we don't know what'll happen in June, July, and August, but we're going to find out. So those are, we've talked about office, shopping center, and multifamily. I think industrial is still cooking. That's what we know. Lastly, my suggestion is, and the whole purpose again of today, is that if we use the principles that we learned today of negotiating with the interests of the other party in mind, as usual, Omaha and Lincoln and our Nebraska area will pass through this virus. I don't want to say we're not going to be harmed, but I'm going to say that because our commercial real estate community has learned how to work together in the past and will work together now, we will work through this. And my guess is by the end of the year and into 2021, we're hopeful we can look back and just say, wow, I'm glad 2020 is behind us. Thank you for joining us.